Welcome to The 5 Books, where each week we talk with a Jewish author about 5 books that are near and dear to them. My name is Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen, and today I'll be talking with Judith Viorst about her latest memoir, Making the Best of What's Left, When We're Too Old to Get the Chairs Reupholstered.
It's a different time of life, what I call the final fifth, the years between 80 and 100. And most people do not live dramatically beyond that. And that's the age when a lot of pretty final decisions are made about how you are hoping to shape those last years.
Judith Viorst is the author of the beloved children's book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, which has sold some 4 million copies. She's also the author of the Lulu books, including Lulu and the Brontosaurus, the New York Times bestseller Necessary Losses, 4 musicals, and poetry for children and adults. Judith has written books for each decade of life after 20, including It's Hard to Be Hip Over 30 and Other Tragedies of Married Life, Forever 50 and Other Negotiations, and Nearing 90 and Other Comedies of Late Life. She's now here to discuss her latest book, Making the Best of What's Left. In this episode, we'll talk about why Judith and her family stopped celebrating Christmas.
I guess it was 1972. I was writing for Women's Magazine, and I wrote what I thought was a cute piece, My Jewish Christmas. And I got walloped with letters from people all over the world. Very, very, very upset with me.
And we'll discuss Judith's love of messy main characters, in part inspired by Maurice Sendak.
I always liked the idea of imperfect heroines and heroes. I mean, I remember encountering a character once mockingly named Beautiful Vanilla. She was a girl named Beautiful Vanilla. I didn't like characters who were beautiful vanillas.
All that and more coming up next. I really am so delighted to have you. Thank you so much for doing this, and welcome to the 5 Books, Judith.
Very happy to be here.
You've published dozens of books, and every kind of book: children's books, poetry, nonfiction, fiction, even a musical. You're perhaps best known for the Alexander series, especially Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, which was adapted into a film in 2014. You wrote poems for New York Magazine for decades, and starting in your 30s, you began publishing a book for each new decade of your life. They were honest, funny, wise reflections on marriage and parenting and aging and loss. Your latest is Making the Most of What's Left, When We're Too Old to Get the Chairs Reupholstered. And it's a meditation on what you call the final fifth of life. Having already written Unexpectedly 80 and Nearing 90, what made you want to revisit aging with a new perspective?
Because it's a different time of life, very definitely so. I mean, it is what I call the final fifth, the years between 80 and 100. And most people do not live dramatically beyond that. And that's the age when a lot of pretty final decisions are made about how you are hoping to shape those last years.
And was there a decade or a book of your decades series that you felt like is the one that you feel closest to, or one that you like the best?
Well, for a long time, my answer to that was the 50s. I thought that the 50s were a time when you had gotten over the really hard times, I think, of the 40s. The 40s, you were finally realizing you were going to die no matter how crafty you were, and that you weren't going to be a ballerina or have an affair with Paul Newman, and that a lot of doors were closed to you. There was a lot of things that were not possible anymore. And I used to make that as a speech when I would talk to people on a lecture tour. And every single time I said what I just said to you, some woman would stand up, raise her hand, and say, "Wait till the 50s, honey. They're so much better." And they always were, because we had sort of nailed down a lot of things by then in terms of we didn't just know what couldn't be and never would be, but we also knew what we were good at. We weren't as self-centered as we used to be, or self-pitying as we used to be, as judgmental as we used to be. We really mellowed, and it felt like a very almost true general experience. So that for years was my favorite decade. I went forward to the 90s for a while because I was so amazed at how nice the 90s were turning out to be. Then my husband died. I went back to the 50s again when he was around.
Hey, I wanted to tell you about a new podcast I've been listening to that I think you'll love called Thoughts and Prayers from the Shalom Hartman Institute. It's hosted by Jessica Fisher, and it's a moving exploration of Jewish prayer and why it matters in modern life. Each episode weaves together personal stories, ancient texts, and conversations with thinkers and rabbis like Ilana Steinhain, Yessi Klein Halevi, Lauren Holtzblatt, and Yehuda Kurtzer, and more. They're wrestling with what it means to pray in our modern world. It's beautifully produced, deeply personal, and full of the kinds of questions that stay with you long after you've listened. If you're curious about spirituality, community, or what prayer means today, check out Thoughts and Prayers from the Shalom Hartman Institute, available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen, host of the 5 Books podcast. This year, we're celebrating the centennial of National Jewish Book Month with our partners at the Jewish Book Council. We're looking ahead to the next 100 years and asking, what Jewish book do you hope people are still reading in 2125? Now more than ever, it matters to create space for Jewish authors and stories. Your listening lifts up their voices and helps carry Jewish literature forward. Tell us your picks on Instagram at 5bookspod and discover what books the people you admire are choosing. Let's build the next 100 years of reading Jewish books together. Book 1, A Jewish Book That Impacted Your Jewish Identity. The Assistant by Bernard Malamud. Before we get into the book itself, I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit what your household was like Jewishly growing up.
My husband and I had a more Jewish household than when I was growing up. My family we definitely knew we were Jews, and there was no question about that. But we didn't do anything particularly Jewish. I grew up with Christmas trees. I never had a Passover until I had one at somebody else's house when I was 21. We didn't belong to a temple. We sort of hung out outside the temple on Yom Kippur so we could find boys to take us for hamburgers. My husband came from a more observant household, and so I slowly moved in that direction, and then had one major move when I guess it was 1972. I was writing for Women's Magazine, and I wrote what I thought was a cute piece, My Jewish Christmas, because we were still having Christmas trees at my house. And I got walloped with letters from people all over the world, very, very, very upset with me. And at first I was very upset with them at being criticized. And I thought, well, aren't we supposed to be more tolerant of each other's ways? And then I read the letters again and started thinking about all these people in little towns all over America trying to hold on to their Jewishness in very Christian neighborhoods and societies, and that this smartass from Washington, D.C. was saying, oh, la-di-da, it's not that big a deal. And I had a vote in my family. I asked my 3 boys, listen to why I think I like Christmas trees, listen to why a lot of people think you shouldn't have a Christmas tree if you're Jewish, and you decide whether we're going to have Christmas trees anymore. And they all voted it out. I gave a very fair and very finally understanding how stupid I'd been presentation of the case.
No, I think the most shocking part of that is that you received that feedback and were able to take it in. It's such a radical concept right now.
Yes, it was a transformative experience. The letters were so passionate, some of them interminable. And I was first indignant. I then gave it another look, and I became transformed.
And did it transform how you felt about Christmas?
Oh, yeah. I was done with Christmas trees, and I spent about a decade in search of the perfect pot roast recipe for a Seder. My kids got bar mitzvah, we joined a temple, and, it was a very big deal.
I know you make a mean matzo ball.
I make a really good matzo ball.
I love your reflections on your childhood obsession with death and dramatic poetry. I especially appreciate that you killed your parents in every story that you wrote as a child. I have a child writer who does the same to me.
Don't take it personally.
Where do you think that came from? And also, when did you gain the distance to look at it with that loving mocking?
I finally figured out where it came from because I wasn't a particularly morbid kid. My mother's favorite poem when I was growing up was Annabel Lee. You don't know if you remember Annabel Lee, but she's a fair maiden who wind comes out of the cloud one night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. So she dies at an early age, and her boyfriend, this is Edgar Allan Poe who would do this, boyfriend sleeps in her sepulcher with her every night to keep her company. But I wound up under the impression that a poem wasn't a poem unless it had a corpse in it. That's what legitimized it as poetry. So I always had a dead body. And not just my parents, though. I also had dead soldiers, and I had a dead dog. Once I killed an entire family. Don't ask me why, but I just thought you needed death in there. It wasn't poetry.
You've also written so powerfully about your relationship with your sister, Lois, the tension, the rivalry, and the grief of losing her too soon. And sibling relationships are a recurring theme in so many of your books. What do you think you've learned about what parents can do or can't do to foster positive sibling bonds?
I think what helps, my husband and I sort of talked about what we wish we had done differently when our kids were growing up. And it's hard to do, but I would certainly try that. Of having special things, separate things for each of the kids. You know, not always making them the Viorst boys, throw them in the car, we're all going to do this together and that together, the other thing together. But oddly enough, sort of strengthening the bonds by respecting their differences and their different interests. And I had one friend who had 4 daughters, and each daughter had her special little things she did with her mommy. And I love that idea. And I think rather than separate them and make them feel they have no connection with each other, it gives them a grounding in each their own thing. I have no idea whether that's psychologically valid. I've never tested it out, though my friend with the 4 daughters has 4 spectacular daughters who are beloved friends of each other. But I think I would give that a try.
That's good advice. You wrote in this book how much you wished that you'd asked your parents and your grandparents more about their own lives.
Oh, God. It is my biggest regret. And my number one, I'm sort of an advice giver, but one of my number one piece of advice when I talk to people and they say, oh, it's so boring being with this granny or this one or that. I say, ask questions. People have stories. Don't miss your opportunity. You'll never forgive yourself. It just never entered my mind as a sort of self-centered teenage girl to do that. And even as a writer who interviewed people, now I ask everybody questions. And I want to know people's stories. And without trying very hard to not be obnoxious, I dig in as far as I possibly can. I remember people's life stories that they've forgotten. I've heard them tell their story incorrectly, and I've corrected them on what the story really was. I just think there is so much there. At a certain point, these people, particularly, your family members, they die. You can never, ever, ever ask these questions again. It's gone. And then you start thinking of the millions of questions you should have asked them.
I can imagine that your background as a psychologist and writer leads to that curiosity. That makes sense. So we're going to talk about The Assistant by Bernard Malamud, and I am really excited to hear about this one because when we started the podcast, I assumed that Malamud would come up for lots of people, and this is the first time that anyone's talking about him.
Yeah, he's one of the great Jewish writers with Bellows and Roth. And the books that I have been interested by Jewish writers they have a touch of the immigration story, and the immigration story is very powerful, and Malamud's The Assistant. Because here's this poor guy living in Brooklyn trying desperately to survive running a grocery store, and he's still just barely making it. And how hard it was. My parents were both born in this country. My grandparents were not. And my grandmother actually ran a grocery store. Trying to survive in the world as an immigrant is very, very moving to me.
Did it feel familiar to you in any way, either the people and their immigrant experience or just the kind of Jewish environment that it portrays?
A little bit, but not a lot. I mean, I had heard a few stories about my mother's childhood, that her father had died young. He and my grandmother owned this grocery store, and everybody told my grandmother to send the kids off to the orphan asylum. She was a young widow with no resources, and my grandma kept all the children and ran the grocery store. How she did this are the questions that I stupidly did not ask.
So what made you land on The Assistant?
I read it and I immediately loved it. I mean, he's a beautiful writer, very simple and powerful, and gets a lot said in a few words. It's a story of this grocery man and his wife and his daughter Helen. And one night he gets beaten up and robbed by two people. One of them is a guy named Frank, an Italian-American, I guess in his 20s. Was the kind of person my mother would have called a bum. He didn't have jobs. He did shady things, and he was a bad guy. Except the next day he was feeling guilty about it, really guilty about it, and goes to the grocery store and asks whether he could work there free in exchange for renting out one of their rooms in the building. And that's how this guy, Frank, gets into the story, and he is the assistant. There's a struggle inside Frank to be a better person than he is. And the book, it winds up being a story of moral redemption in which this assistant tries very hard suffers a lot because he's very often outcast from the family, suffers a lot, and struggles to be a good person and wants to be a good person. And this is something I think other things I read of Malamud's is, quite an obsession of his, that you have agency, that there are some choices you can make about what kind of human being you want to be. And if you make them, you redeem yourself. You redeem the bad things you've done. And in this case, you become a Jew, which Frank does. He converts. I had vaguely remembered when I read the book a million years ago that I had sort of gotten the impression that if you put in enough suffering, you were entitled to be a Jew. But I don't think that's quite the point he was making.
I appreciate that you point out the aspect of agency. That's such a strong theme in your writing of people taking responsibility for their own lives and actions and being able to frame things being a conscious choice.
Absolutely. And I think it's the primary aspect of every book that I've chosen here. I didn't do it on purpose, but I look back and I realize that's sort of what I was doing.
Book 2, A Jewish Book That Shaped You, Where the Wild Things Are, by Maurice Sendak.
Maurice Sendak is Jewish. I worship the ground he walks on. He is so incredibly brilliant and also sort of digs in. I think somebody once said that he transformed the fairy tale pieties of children's books into something so much truer. And, Sendak was somebody else who dug down and was very comfortable challenging the sentimentality and innocence of childhood. This kid, Max, in Where the Wild Things Are, is a very intense and often extremely bratty, angry kid. And the night of this story, he has chased the dog with a fork, said some not nice things to his mother, and been sent up to bed without his supper. And with Maurice Sendak's wild, fierce drawings of monsters, he lands in the world of the wild things they're roaring their terrible roars, and they're gnashing their terrible teeth, and they're showing their terrifying claws. And Max is completely unfazed because he's just as wild as they are, in fact, even more so, and becomes the king of the wild things. And he leads them in, God knows what this is, a wild rumpus, but extremely wild and extremely naughty. It goes on for some indefinite period of time. And then Max starts getting lonesome. He gets lonesome to be where there is someone who loved him best of all. And he renounces, much to their sorrow, the role of king of the wild things and goes back home where his supper is waiting and it's still hot. Oh, God, I love that book so much. And I just loved, again, the acknowledgement of all the complexities of people and the turbulence inside people, including sweet young kids. And this boy's ability to make a choice. He had agency. He wanted to go back where someone loved him best of all. It's a book about recognizing, experiencing, maybe even living out some of your wild things, and then making the choice to tame them.
At what stage in your writing life did you encounter his books?
I encountered it, I think, when it came out and started reading. I think it came out in the early 60s. I remember reading it to my son, Tony, maybe within a year or so, and exaggerating all of the roars and the gnashing of the teeth and everything. So it didn't totally scare him because I laugh at Mommy with her claws and her teeth gnashing.
And did the Sendak books unlock something for you in your own writing?
I think it really did. I always liked the idea of imperfect heroines and heroes. I mean, my favorite children's book growing up was The Secret Garden, with a heroine named Mary who was such a brat. And turns out what I'm interested in is ultimately lovable and redeemable. And since I was feeling rather imperfect myself, it was such a consolation to meet Mary and not have to have, I remember encountering a character once mockingly named Beautiful Vanilla. She was a girl named Beautiful Vanilla. I didn't like characters who were beautiful vanillas. And I got very interested in naughty kids or difficult kids. And I've written 4 Lulu books now about a really bratty girl. I love it. All the letters I get from the kids, all the girls love her. They're just crazy about her. And she always turns out to be good enough at the end. Lulu is never going to be an angel, but good enough by the end. So, yes, Sendak made everything possible. He just opened up the imagination to what can I get away with here and still keep her, on the right side of the line. I came across this adorable story about Sendak, which sort of tells what kind of writer he is and that I aspire to be. He had gotten a fan letter from a kid, and he thought it was cute, so he wrote back a nice fan letter to him and even drew a little wild thing on it. And the story goes that very soon after, Sendak gets a call from the boy's mother, and she said, "My son got your letter, and he liked it so much, he ate it." That just sounded like such perfect Sendak. And,
I love you so much, I'll eat you up, right? Isn't that the line?
I eat you up, I love you so, exactly.
And I also love that the wild thing is actually a wilde chaya, the Yiddish expression I grew up hearing was a wild thing.
Yeah, I heard that it was. I didn't know what it was, but I heard that it was a Yiddish one. He certainly had a lot of Jewish influence. He wrote a book, I think it's called Brundabar. He wrote it with Tony Kushner about the Holocaust, but it's about kids being bullied. But it's a gentle transcription of the Holocaust, I think.
Your book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, has been something of a parenting Bible for me. It came out long before this resilience became a buzzword. You treated children's emotions with so much respect and reminded them with humor and honesty that you don't always get what you want. And for me, even now, when I speak to my college-age kids and they share some terrible story, I will often give them some version of some days are like that, even in Australia.
Yeah.
Because now, I mean, that idea of like having children tolerate frustration seems to be what everyone is trying to inculcate. And that's what your book teaches without any of the jargon.
Without saying, yeah, it's very important to learn. It's very unpleasant to learn. Alexander, who is now a really smooth, darling, middle-aged father of 3 kids and a fabulous father, he got over that, but it took a while because he was very emotionally intense and he got irritated very easily. So we had many conversations. And
was that your strategy of just sort of like, that's just what it's like?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's the way it happens. And, you know, when it's no fair. Well, you know, guess what?
Book 3, a book that changed your worldview, The Odyssey by Homer.
I mean, that's quite a question. What's a book that everybody should read? But this book was really terrific for that. I mean, he was a Greek superhero, and he was the most, again, something that I love, such a mixture of qualities, hot-blooded and cold-blooded and sneaky and honorable and faithful and basically outrageously faithless. He slept with every girl and goddess between Troy and Ithaca, and he... though he had a great line, she never won the heart within me, never. You know, so don't worry, honey. And he was just open to experience. He wanted to know the world. He wanted to eat the world the way that little boy wanted to eat the letter. You know, when the ship sailed past the sirens whose song would drag the sailors off the ship and into their death, he wanted to hear it, but he didn't want to die. So he asked to be shackled to the ship, so he could not follow the siren's song, but could hear it, because he wanted to know. He sort of fearlessly tangled with all kinds of mythological monsters, of Circe, who turned men into pigs, and he's the guy who had thought up the idea of the Trojan horse, of putting all those soldiers into the wooden horse and tricking the Trojans into letting armed soldiers into their camp. He was a man of many parts, and that story, I read a lot of versions of it. The last version I read, which was by Robert Fagles, which was just so poetic and so clear and wonderful. And there were also versions for children. So I actually read Alexander when he was a little boy. I read him the Iliad and the Odyssey, the children's version. When I finished reading them to Alexander, he said, "Where's the sequel? Where's the sequel?" And there wasn't a sequel, so he decided to write a sequel. He wrote a sequel, 2 pages, and insisted I send it to my children's book editor, who sent him a really sweet rejection slip. But the idea that this is a book that women love, men love, kids love, grown-ups love, and that sort of contains an adventure story and the boundless curiosity of our superhero. I just think it has something to offer everybody.
When did you first encounter it?
Oh, I was probably, I don't know, maybe 12, something like that, when I read it for the first time, yeah.
Did someone give it to you?
I have no idea where I got it. I used to go to the library and put my hands down as low as I could and clasp them together and pile books up and hold the top one with my chin and try to get home without them falling out. I would go through swaths of books. You know, I read every fairy tale book that was in the library. I read every Nancy Drew that was ever written, and still remember that my favorite was The Clue of the Tapping Heels, because she gets kidnapped twice in it. And then this great breakthrough to The Count of Monte Cristo. And I think probably around then I was reading the Odyssey.
No surprise that you became a writer.
Well, my mother was a passionate reader. I know this isn't possible, but I felt like she read a book a day. books were very, very valued in my house, very valued. And so I decided I ought to write books.
Book 4, the book you're reading now, I'll Be Right Here by Amy Bloom.
It's just packed with characters, all of them with amazing stories. And she's a wonderful writer. And it's about families that are made of DNA and families that are made by choice. And lots of really good stories. And it's a delicious book.
Book 5, the author's latest book, Making the Best of What's Left When We're Too Old to Get the Chairs Reupholstered by Judith Viorst. I'm curious if you approached writing this book differently than you had any of your other books.
In one big way. I'm a very personal writer, but I've always had very clear boundaries about how far I go in talking about anything having to do with me or my life. And I thought of this as probably the last book of essays that I was going to ever write. And I decided that I was going to talk about things I had never talked about before. So this book is, I would say, my most personal book. I talk about my first child who died. I'd never written about that before. I don't think I ever wrote about my grandma. I don't think I wrote about... There's a lot of stuff in there that I deliberately chosen not to write before and deliberately chose to write.
And how does it feel having written those personal things?
A little more exposed than I liked, but I still felt that, the deepest parts of myself still belonged to me and my privacy. But I did want to put them out there. I did want to put them out there as sort of a more complete picture of who I was.
You wrote such a beautiful thank you, goodbye to your husband. It was so moving. You also write about not believing in the afterlife, and you interview lots of people about that. But you say you believe in remembering those who have died and wanting people to remember you. I love that poem where you reflect on what you want people to remember you for. It's things like being reliable, great at Scrabble, sending valentines, keeping secrets. And you also talk about interviewing men and women and how so many men seem to, when you ask them what their greatest achievement was, they talk about work, and women talk about their children.
Every single one, except one who only didn't talk about them because she didn't deserve all the credit for how wonderful they were. But every woman, people who were super accomplished, well-known people themselves, and when they said they wanted to be remembered for their children, they never said, my daughter, the famous movie star, or my son, the great novelist. They always talked about their character, their decency, their warmth, their humor. They were proud of them, and not for any labels, no labels, just for who they were as people. So I love that.
I love it too. And you write about this a little bit, but what do you make of that difference?
I think that what men accomplish in this world feels like a definition of who they are in a way that it doesn't for women. Maybe it's our failure to be sufficiently feminist, or maybe it's just the umbilical connection.
Or maybe that's what lives on beyond us also.
Good. I think that's a good point. I quote my dad in this book, who had the best line. My father was not a particularly poetic person. He looked at my boys one day and he said, they're the best books you ever wrote. I agree with that.
You also write so movingly about ageism, and that, again, the idea of choice, that it's often a choice for people to feel left out. And you write that you can decide that life is too short for hurt feelings.
Feel very strongly about that. Because things come up all the time. You don't get included in some family outing, or your grandkids are hanging around with you, but they're all talking to each other about famous people and sports achievements that you don't know what the hell they're talking about, or some clerk at a store starts calling you honey and dearie. And you can get affronted. You can say, I'm not being treated with respect. I'm not being included in things. I decided that you could find a good excuse to be offended every day, or you could choose to shrug it off, to forget about it, to let it pass, face the fact that it's really no big deal. and you're going to have a much happier life.
Where do you think that perspective comes from?
I think I learned that very early because I had a bunch of aunts. My father had several sisters. I was always told, be careful around my aunts because they were sensitive. Well, they were only sensitive one way. I mean, they would say the most annoying or bossy or critical, well, that's a dress. You change your hair? Why? They would feel very comfortable saying anything they wanted to. Their sensitivity only went one way. Their feelings could get hurt at the drop of a hat. So I was thinking a lot about feelings and hurt feelings for a long time. It took me a while to realize my aunts weren't exactly all that sensitive. They were one-way sensitive. And then just observing people, what would get them upset or offended or say they're not talking to someone. So what a waste of life. What a waste of time.
You also write so candidly about loneliness and the loneliness of old age. You write, we don't even know who we are without someone to see us. What advice do you have for others who are in the last fifth of life to stay connected and feel seen?
Well, what I think is so important is community and connection, and is finding some people that you're doing things with who you're staying in regular touch with. I mean, I have beloved friends who do not live in Washington. I have some who are here, but not everyone. And I decided that what really works is the 1 hour phone call once a week. So that you're not just getting the headlines of people's lives when big dramas occurs, but you're getting what they made for dinner last night or what they're wearing to this party or a wonderful movie they saw. That you're getting the texture of their lives, that you're together with them even if you're far apart, and that requires detail. So that's a big one for me.
Yeah, I can imagine it's so difficult having been with your husband for so many years to then navigate life without him. What has grief taught you in your 90s that you may not have known earlier?
Well, I didn't realize, because I think of myself as a competent, independent woman, I didn't realize how deeply coupled I was. And that just the presence of this person we met when we were 18 and 19 years old. When I think about loneliness, the only person I'm really lonely for is my husband. I miss him. He's irreplaceable. There are lots of other comforts and pleasures in lives, absolutely. But I was part of a couple, and I liked it that way.
Yeah. And are you still writing?
I'm sort of still writing, yes. I wanted to write one more children's book. I had an idea for it. It's a very difficult idea and difficult to write. And I've written 2 pages, and it hasn't budged since then. Every once in a while, I fondle the notebook where it's written, and I look at it, but I'm not ready to continue it yet. It's very challenging. So we'll see. I think I'm writing. I hope so. I very much hope so. This has been such a joy for me, a real highlight. I'm so appreciative that you made the time. I loved hearing all of the things that you shared with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it too.
Thank you so much for joining us today for the 5 Books. Our guest today was Judith Viorst, talking about her memoir, Making the Best of What's Left When We're Too Old to Get the Chairs Reupholstered. You can find a link to the book and all the others Judith discussed in our show notes. If you've read one of the great books recommended on our show, we'd love to hear about it. Drop us a comment on our Instagram @5bookspod or in our email, team@5bookspod.org. Also, we have a newsletter. If you'd like an email reminder to keep you up to date with new episodes and links to all the books we discussed, plus other great reads directly into your inbox, you can sign up in our show notes or on our website, 5bookspod.org. You can also find transcripts for all episodes there. I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Our producer is Odelia Rubin. Editorial and website support from Amelia Merrill. Music by Dove Rosenblatt and Blue Dot Sessions. Art by Elad Lifshitz at the Dove Abramson Studio. Thanks especially to the Jewish Book Council.